A normal morning in Orlando, a car left behind in a quiet parking lot, and a 24-year-old woman who vanished without a trace. There were no screams, no shattered glass, no signs of a struggle, only the stillness of a condominium complex waking up to another Florida sunrise, unaware that something irreversible had already happened. The disappearance of Jennifer Kesse is not just another cold case buried in filing cabinets for nearly 2 decades. It is a mystery that continues to unsettle investigators, haunt her family, and linger in the public conscience. A single surveillance clip shows an unidentified figure calmly parking her car, walking away, and disappearing behind the frame of a fence at precisely the wrong moments. What truly happened on that January morning in 2006? Was it a random act of opportunity, a hidden betrayal, or a fatal mistake concealed in silence? Tonight, we step into Jennifer's world, where absence speaks louder than evidence. Orlando, Florida is often imagined as a city of spectacle. Theme parks glow at night, highways hum with tourists, and sunlight washes over manicured neighborhoods with a sense of endless possibility. The Mosaic at Millennia condominium complex stood within that atmosphere of upward mobility, modern architecture, and controlled comfort. From the outside, it appeared secure and orderly, a place designed for young professionals building their futures. In daylight, the property felt almost staged in its calmness. Palm trees framed clean walkways. Balconies overlooked carefully arranged parking spaces. Doors closed softly behind residents who believed they were stepping into private sanctuaries. Yet safety, when assumed rather than examined, can become a fragile illusion. Communities under construction often hide vulnerabilities beneath fresh paint and polished surfaces. Jennifer Kesse embodied the promise that places like Mosaic were built to attract. At 24 years old, she had recently graduated from the University of Central Florida with a degree in finance. She had secured a position at Westgate Resorts, beginning what seemed to be a steady, ambitious climb within the financial industry. Her life was not chaotic or unstable. It was structured, intentional, and forward-moving. She had recently purchased her first condominium. That detail matters more than it first appears. Buying a home at 24 is not simply a financial milestone. It is a psychological declaration of independence. Jennifer was not drifting through early adulthood. She was claiming it. The condo represented autonomy, discipline, and the belief that her future was something she could design with care. Her parents, Rob and Joyce Kesse, lived roughly 2 hours away. The physical distance symbolized a transition rather than a separation. Their relationship remained close, warm, and communicative. Jennifer called frequently. She shared details about work, travel, and the ordinary frustrations of adult life. There were no visible fractures in that bond, no signs of estrangement or secrecy that would suggest hidden turmoil. Her boyfriend, Rob Allen, was another stable presence in her life. Their relationship was described as serious and supportive. Friends did not report jealousy, volatility, or public conflict. There were no dramatic breakups, no sudden changes in behavior, no emotional turbulence that might foreshadow danger. From every observable angle, Jennifer's personal life appeared steady and healthy. Psychologically, she did not fit the profile of someone attempting to escape. She had career goals, financial responsibility, and strong family ties. Her routines were consistent. She maintained friendships. She planned vacations. Stability surrounded her, and she seemed to move comfortably within it. This makes her disappearance more unsettling, because it disrupts the expectation that chaos leaves warning signs. However, beneath that structured life, there were subtle discomforts. The Mosaic complex was still undergoing renovations. Many units were empty. Construction crews moved in and out of buildings throughout the day. Temporary workers, some of whom did not speak English fluently, occupied the grounds regularly. The environment was transitional, not fully settled. Jennifer had mentioned to her parents that she sometimes felt uneasy around certain construction workers. She described being stared at, watched in a way that made her uncomfortable. The comments were not framed as panic, but as irritation mixed with unease. She did not file a formal complaint. She did not escalate the concern. She treated it as something inconvenient rather than threatening. This detail introduces a psychological tension that often emerges in hindsight. Many victims experience moments of instinctive discomfort before something irreversible occurs. Those instincts are frequently minimized, both by the individual and by the systems around them. Jennifer's unease did not transform into protective action, perhaps because nothing overt had happened. The boundary between awkwardness and danger can be difficult to define in real time. The environment itself contributed to that ambiguity. A partially occupied condominium complex creates blind spots. Empty units mean fewer witnesses. Open access during construction reduces the predictability of who belongs and who does not. Security systems in such environments are often inconsistent. Residents may assume surveillance exists without verifying its reliability. From a criminological perspective, transitional spaces create opportunity. They are not abandoned, but they are not fully secure. They are populated, yet not cohesive. In these settings, anonymity thrives. A person can move through hallways and parking lots without drawing sustained attention. Familiarity becomes diluted. Strangers blend into the background. Yet it is important to avoid projecting certainty backward. There is no confirmed evidence that any construction worker harmed Jennifer. There is only the psychological weight of her discomfort and the structural vulnerabilities of her environment. These elements do not form conclusions, but they form context. Context shapes probability, even when proof remains absent. What makes this stage of the story particularly haunting is its ordinariness. There were no dramatic confrontations, no reported stalking incidents, no documented threats. Jennifer's life did not contain obvious darkness. It contained routine, ambition, and mild unease. The kind of unease many people dismiss daily in workplaces, apartment complexes, and public spaces. Silence in cases like this begins long before the disappearance. It begins in the small decisions not to escalate concern. It begins in assumptions that someone else is watching, that systems are functioning, that discomfort will pass. It begins in the belief that normalcy is protective. Jennifer Kesse stood at the intersection of independence and vulnerability. She was young but disciplined, confident yet navigating a transitional environment. She had carved out her own space in the world, but that space was not as sealed as it appeared. The mosaic at Millennia promised security through design, yet design cannot eliminate human unpredictability. When we look back at the days before she vanished, nothing appears explosive. Instead, we see a life in motion, carefully built and seemingly secure. That is precisely why the silence that followed feels so unnatural. A perfect life does not usually dissolve without warning, but sometimes it does. On January 23, 2006, Jennifer Kesse returned to Orlando following a weekend trip to St. Croix with her boyfriend. The getaway had been simple and pleasant: sunshine, relaxation, and easy conversations about what lay ahead. When she arrived back at her condominium that evening, everything seemed normal. There were no arguments, no visible stress, no indication that anything in her life had changed. It felt like the quiet ending to an ordinary vacation. That night, she spoke with her boyfriend on the phone. The call was routine. They talked about their trip and the week ahead. There was no urgency in her voice, no hint of distress. The conversation ended the way countless calls do, casually, with the expectation of tomorrow. Morning came quietly on January 24th. Orlando woke to another weekday under soft winter light. Inside her condominium, Jennifer likely followed her usual routine: shower, dress, gather her belongings. There were no reports of screams or struggle. No neighbor described unusual noise. The stillness of early morning remained undisturbed. At approximately 7:30 a.m., she left her condominium. This estimate comes from reconstructed routine rather than direct observation. She was scheduled to arrive at work around 8 a.m., a short drive away. Under normal conditions, she would have arrived on time. But she never reached her office at Westgate Resorts. Her white Chevrolet Malibu was no longer in its assigned parking space. At first, that detail meant nothing. It aligned with a typical commute, a young professional leaving for work, a car backing out, a day beginning. Nothing in that moment suggested disappearance. Concern emerged when Jennifer failed to appear at work and did not call to explain her absence. Colleagues attempted to reach her. Their calls went unanswered. This behavior was inconsistent with her character. She was known to be responsible and communicative. Silence, in this context, felt wrong. As hours passed, her family grew uneasy. Repeated attempts to contact her produced nothing. Psychologically, this is often the first fracture in missing person cases, the shift from routine to uncertainty. The absence of communication becomes louder than any argument could have been. When law enforcement was contacted, the initial response reflected a familiar assumption. Jennifer was an adult. Adults sometimes leave voluntarily. They disconnect. They change plans. In the early hours, voluntary disappearance remained a possibility. Such assumptions can subtly shape the pace and direction of an investigation. Yet voluntary disappearance requires motive. There was no evidence of financial distress or emotional crisis. No signs she had prepared to leave. Personal belongings. And essentials remained in her condominium. Gradually, these details began to contradict the idea that she had chosen to vanish. 2 days later, the case shifted dramatically. Jennifer's Chevrolet Malibu was found at another apartment complex, roughly 1 mile from her home. The vehicle was parked neatly, not abandoned recklessly. Its placement suggested intention rather than chaos. The interior did not reveal obvious signs of violence. There were no immediate indicators of a struggle. This created a psychological paradox. If harm had occurred impulsively, why move the car with care? If she left voluntarily, why park so close to home and disappear completely? Surveillance footage from the complex added an eerie layer. Around midday on January 24th, a camera captured an individual parking Jennifer's vehicle. The person exited calmly, wearing light-colored clothing, and walked away without visible haste. What makes the footage haunting is not what it shows, but what it hides. As the individual walked along the sidewalk, vertical fence posts blocked the camera's view at the exact moments when the face would have been visible. Frame after frame, obstruction replaced identification. Investigators later described this alignment as a cruel coincidence. The camera angle, spacing of the posts, and timing of the person's stride combined to conceal the face. Still, psychologically, it fuels speculation. Was it chance, or awareness of blind spots? The figure's body language appeared controlled. There was no running, no visible panic. The person parked, stepped out, and walked away steadily. That composure introduces unsettling possibilities. Calmness after a potential crime can suggest confidence, detachment, or belief in avoiding detection. However, interpretation without identification remains speculative. Behavior alone cannot confirm intent. It can only raise questions. And in this case, questions multiplied faster than answers. The distance between Jennifer's home and where the car was left is small, walkable within minutes. This geographical detail matters. It implies familiarity with the area. 1 mile is close enough to return on foot without drawing attention, suggesting comfort within that environment. Meanwhile, Jennifer herself remained unseen. There was no confirmed sighting of her after she left home. No verified witness described seeing her enter the vehicle with someone else. No additional footage captured her beyond the boundaries of her residence. The morning she never arrived. At work transformed from a scheduling anomaly into a timeline under scrutiny. Each minute after 7:30 a.m. carried weight. Yet possibility is not proof. It is simply the space where imagination fills the gaps left by silence. In criminal psychology, silence can function as both shield and weapon. It protects the unknown, person who walked away from the car. It also magnifies the vulnerability of the missing individual. The more routine the morning appeared, the more disturbing its outcome became. Jennifer's disappearance did not erupt into chaos. It slipped quietly into an ordinary weekday. A woman left for work. A car was relocated. A camera recorded a faceless figure, and then, nothing. The day gave no warning it would become historic. It began like any other. Perhaps that is the hardest truth to accept. Because sometimes the most unsettling crimes are not marked by noise, but by absence. When Jennifer Kesse was officially classified as a missing person, the investigation began with the predictable inner circle. Detectives questioned her boyfriend, Rob Allen, examining the final phone call, the recent vacation, and any sign of relational strain. They scrutinized her parents, her friends, and her colleagues. This early focus followed a statistical reality. In many disappearances, the answer lies close to home. Yet interviews did not yield fractures. Rob Allen cooperated and provided consistent timelines. There was no documented history of violence, jealousy, or escalating conflict. Jennifer's parents were transparent, proactive, and relentless in their search for answers. Her co-workers described her as professional and responsible. The psychological markers that often signal domestic volatility were notably absent. Investigators processed Jennifer's condominium carefully. They searched for signs of forced entry, overturned furniture, broken locks, or evidence of struggle. Nothing definitive emerged. The space appeared orderly. Personal belongings remained inside. There were no obvious indicators of chaos interrupting her routine. This absence of disturbance complicated the theory of a confrontation occurring inside the unit. The lack of physical disruption does not eliminate the possibility of coercion. Many crimes occur without visible violence. A perpetrator may rely on surprise, familiarity, or manipulation rather than force. However, without forensic evidence, investigators are left interpreting silence. In this case, the silence inside her home was almost clinical. Attention gradually shifted toward the construction workers present at the Mosaic at Millennia Complex. The property was still undergoing renovation. Workers moved in and out freely, often unsupervised. Some were temporary laborers hired through subcontractors. Record-keeping was inconsistent. Incomplete employment documentation created investigative gaps. This shift in focus was influenced by Jennifer's earlier comments about feeling uncomfortable. She had mentioned being stared at by certain workers, though she had not filed a formal complaint. The memory lingered in the minds of investigators. Discomfort, when viewed retrospectively, can transform into a potential warning sign. Detectives attempted to identify and interview as many workers as possible. However, incomplete rosters and inconsistent oversight complicated this effort. Some laborers had already moved on to other projects. Others lacked detailed identification records. The transient nature of construction labor created a landscape of partial visibility. In parallel, media coverage intensified. The image of a young, accomplished woman vanishing from a modern condominium resonated nationally. News outlets amplified the mystery of the surveillance footage showing an unidentified individual parking her vehicle. The faceless figure became a symbol of unanswered questions. Jennifer's parents appeared repeatedly on television, appealing for information. Their composure was steady but strained. They projected both hope and frustration. Media exposure serves a dual function in such cases. It generates tips and awareness, but it also fuels speculation. The narrative can expand beyond verified facts. Rumors began circulating about human trafficking, opportunistic abduction, and organized criminal networks. Florida's reputation as a hub of tourism and transient populations made such theories emotionally compelling. However, law enforcement did not confirm evidence supporting a trafficking operation in Jennifer's disappearance. The speculation reflected public anxiety more than investigative certainty. The psychological effect of widespread media attention is complex. For investigators, it creates pressure to produce answers quickly. For families, it amplifies grief and vulnerability. For the public, it transforms an individual into a symbol. Jennifer's identity risked becoming secondary to the mystery surrounding her. Some construction workers emerged as persons of interest, particularly those without proper documentation. Immigration status entered the conversation, complicating both investigative procedure and public discourse. However, suspicion without evidence does not equal culpability. Law enforcement did not announce charges against any worker in connection to her disappearance. From a criminological standpoint, transient laborers can represent both opportunity and investigative challenge. Limited records and rapid relocation hinder follow-up interviews. Yet the absence of documentation alone cannot establish guilt. It merely increases uncertainty. As months turned into years, frustration grew. The surveillance footage remained the most tangible visual evidence. Technological limitations in 2006 restricted enhancement capabilities. The individual's face, concealed by the alignment of fence posts, remained obscured. Investigators could not definitively determine gender, ethnicity, or age. In 2018, more than a decade after Jennifer disappeared, her family initiated legal action against the Orlando Police Department to obtain full access to the investigative files. This decision signaled a shift from quiet trust to active scrutiny. Families rarely take such steps unless they sense stagnation or oversight. Upon reviewing thousands of pages of case documents, the Kesse family believed that early investigative opportunities may have been missed. They suggested that certain leads were not pursued with sufficient urgency during the initial days following her disappearance. In missing person cases, early hours are often critical. Delays can cascade into permanent gaps. This legal confrontation altered public perception. It reframed the narrative from solely a mysterious crime to a question of procedural adequacy. Trust in institutional response became part of the conversation. While law enforcement defended its actions, the family's persistence underscored a painful truth. Unresolved cases often leave survivors searching not only for answers, but for accountability. Psychologically, an investigation does not have to collapse to lose momentum. Sometimes it fragments. Competing theories emerge, records prove incomplete, technology reaches its limits, and human error complicates direction. Each layer adds ambiguity. Over time, that ambiguity solidifies into a cold case. Jennifer's disappearance became a symbol of investigative paralysis. There was enough to suggest foul play, yet not enough to name a suspect. Surveillance captured someone connected to her car, but no face. Persons of interest surfaced, but without evidence strong enough to prosecute. The case did not collapse. Overnight, it slowly faded, caught between theories and dead ends. For her family, it meant enduring uncertainty. For investigators, it remained unfinished, an unresolved silence that weighed more than evidence ever could. In many unresolved disappearances, investigators eventually turn inward, searching for concealed fractures in the victim's life. Financial strain, secret relationships, hidden addictions, emotional collapse. These elements often provide motive or direction. In Jennifer Kesse's case, that search yielded remarkably little. There was no documented debt crisis, no verified double life, no evidence of clandestine relationships waiting to surface. Her financial records reflected stability. Her employment history showed consistency. Friends and family did not describe dramatic mood swings or isolation. The architecture of her life appeared intact, yet stability on paper does not always erase subtle unease in the body. Sometimes the only signal is a feeling that cannot be quantified. Jennifer had mentioned to her mother that she felt uncomfortable at her condominium complex. She described being stared at by certain construction workers, watched in ways that unsettled her. She did not report explicit threats. She did not describe overt harassment. The discomfort lingered in a gray area between suspicion and proof. That gray area is psychologically significant. Many individuals experience moments of perceived vulnerability, but choose not to escalate them. They rationalize the discomfort as misinterpretation. They fear overreacting. They hope the unease will dissipate on its own. In hindsight, those unreported moments can acquire painful weight. There is no public evidence that Jennifer formally filed a complaint about any worker. No documented confrontation occurred. The discomfort remained a private observation shared within family conversations. It was not codified into a report that might have triggered surveillance or intervention. Silence, again, played its quiet. Role. When evaluating potential hidden fears, investigators must distinguish between subjective anxiety and objective threat. Feeling watched does not always mean danger exists. However, predatory behavior often begins with observation. The boundary between coincidence and targeting can be invisible until after harm occurs. Jennifer's behavioral patterns before her disappearance do not suggest voluntary flight. She made future plans. She returned from vacation energized and prepared for work. She left personal items behind that someone planning an escape would likely take. Her bank accounts showed no unusual withdrawals. There were no farewell messages, no hints of resignation. Psychologically, voluntary disappearance requires either desperation or calculated reinvention. Jennifer exhibited neither. She was professionally invested and socially connected. The evidence aligns more closely with interruption than intention. Something disrupted her morning routine rather than her choosing to abandon it. When considering her mental state, there is no indication of clinical depression or suicidal ideation. Family and friends described her as optimistic and goal-oriented. She had purchased property and was building equity in her future. These are not typical behaviors of someone disengaging from life. This does not mean she was immune to stress. Young professionals often experience pressure to succeed, financial responsibility, and social expectation. Yet stress alone does not translate into disappearance. The psychological portrait that emerges is of a woman managing normal adult challenges without signs of crisis. Another detail complicates the narrative. Investigators employed cadaver dogs and scent-tracking dogs to trace Jennifer's movements. Reports indicated that dogs followed her scent from her condominium unit down toward the parking area. This finding suggests she exited her home and reached the vicinity of her vehicle. The dogs did not indicate her scent returning to the condominium. This absence implies that she did not re-enter voluntarily after stepping outside. While canine tracking is not infallible, it often provides directional insight. The implication is that whatever occurred likely unfolded near or within the parking area. This detail narrows the psychological field. If Jennifer left her condominium under her own power, she may have encountered someone at or near her car. The interaction could have been brief, perhaps even appearing ordinary to an outside observer. A familiar face can lower defenses more effectively than force. If a perpetrator was waiting, this introduces the concept of anticipation. Opportunistic crimes rely on chance. Targeted crimes rely on pattern recognition. Someone observing her routine could identify the approximate time she left each morning. The regularity of her schedule may have created predictability. Predictability brings comfort, but it can also invite risk. We depend on routine, assuming yesterday's safety guarantees today's. Those with harmful intent may exploit that pattern, choosing moments when awareness is lowest. Coercion does not always involve visible struggle. A brief threat or simple deception can control a situation quickly. Without witnesses, the details remain unknown. What stands out most is the silence left behind. The absence of disturbance in her condominium suggests that if she encountered danger, it occurred outside her front door. This spatial boundary is important. It separates private sanctuary from transitional space. Transitional spaces, such as parking lots, are psychologically ambiguous. They are neither fully public nor fully private. The canine scent trail suggests Jennifer likely left her condominium the way she had many mornings before. She may have locked the door expecting to return that evening. In hindsight, that simple, routine act feels devastating. It marks the last confirmed moment in which her movements were her own. Warnings, when viewed backward, often seem subtle. A passing remark about feeling watched. A brief expression of discomfort. Individually, these details prove nothing. Collectively, they create an atmosphere, one that can quietly shape vulnerability long before danger is recognized. There were no dramatic secrets in her life, no clear motive to disappear. Instead, there was routine intersecting with an environment that may not have been as secure as it appeared. If someone targeted her, patience and familiarity may have mattered more than force. In cases like this, signals do not shout. They whisper, a lingering stare, a predictable schedule, an unfinished construction site. After the parking lot, the record ends, and silence becomes the strongest presence left behind. When a disappearance resists resolution for years, theories multiply. Each one attempts to bring structure to chaos. Each one rearranges the same limited facts into a different narrative. In Jennifer's case, the evidence is sparse, the timeline narrow, and the silence persistent. What remains are competing frameworks, each plausible, each incomplete. Let's examine the primary theories that continue to shape discussion. Theory A: personal motive. From someone close. In many disappearance and homicide cases, the perpetrator is statistically someone known to the victim. Intimate partners, acquaintances, co-workers, or family members often appear early in investigations. Emotional motives, jealousy, resentment, betrayal, or financial conflict can escalate into violence. Familiarity provides both access and opportunity, making those closest to the victim a logical starting point for scrutiny. In Jennifer's case, early attention focused on her boyfriend, Rob Allen. The two had recently returned from a vacation, and friends described their relationship as stable and serious. There were no public reports of conflict, threats, or instability prior to her disappearance, and no visible signs of strain. From an investigative perspective, examining close relationships is standard procedure. However, there has been no confirmed evidence of interpersonal conflict. Her boyfriend reportedly had a supported alibi, and no forensic findings have linked family or partner to foul play. Without motive, contradiction, or physical evidence, the theory relies more on statistical probability than case-specific proof. Theory B: accident turned into a cover-up. Another theory suggests the event may have begun as an accident. Jennifer leaves her condominium, reaches the parking lot, and is unintentionally struck by a vehicle. In that scenario, panic replaces reason. The driver, fearing legal consequences or exposure, chooses concealment rather than reporting what happened. This explanation attempts to reconcile several gaps. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle inside her home. The scene did not immediately suggest violence. Her car was later found parked carefully elsewhere, which could indicate an effort to distance the incident from its original location. The theory's strength lies in its simplicity. A sudden external event could unfold quickly and without witnesses. If individuals at the complex feared legal repercussions, that fear might motivate a cover-up. However, there were no confirmed reports of collision damage, debris, or visible blood evidence in the parking area. Relocating a vehicle also requires time and composure, elements not easily aligned with panic. The scenario remains possible, but it depends on several unverified assumptions aligning precisely. Theory C: stranger abduction. This theory centers on environmental vulnerability. Jennifer lived in a condominium complex undergoing renovation where many units were vacant, and construction workers moved freely throughout the property. Security measures were reportedly limited and access points were not strictly controlled. In hindsight, her comments about feeling watched by certain workers take on greater significance. The primary strength of this theory is opportunity. Poorly secured environments increase risk, especially in transitional spaces like parking lots. If someone had observed her routine, they could anticipate when she left each morning. The canine scent trail suggesting she exited toward her vehicle supports the idea that something happened outside her home, not inside. However, no confirmed eyewitness placed a suspicious individual with her that morning. No definitive DNA evidence has been publicly linked to a suspect. While stranger abductions are statistically less common, rarity does not eliminate possibility. Some offenders depend precisely on anonymity. Theory D: someone unexpected from her extended circle. This theory occupies the space between intimacy and total anonymity. It does not point to a close partner or a random stranger, but to someone loosely connected to her world, perhaps a fellow resident, a casual acquaintance, or a worker who had brief contact with her. Familiar, yet not emotionally close. A person might have recognized her face, her vehicle, even her morning routine. That limited familiarity could lower her guard without drawing immediate suspicion. Blending naturally into the condominium environment, This individual would not need dramatic force, only timing and proximity. The weakness remains the same. No confirmed forensic link. There has been no public DNA match, no documented threats, no recorded confrontation. The theory rests largely on behavioral possibility rather than concrete proof. Still, many long unsolved cases eventually reveal offenders who stood in plain sight, noticed but never truly seen. When comparing the major theories, several anchors remain unchanged. There were no credible signs that she left voluntarily. No confirmed evidence of disturbance inside her condominium. Her car was deliberately relocated, and her daily routine likely shaped whatever occurred. These constants narrow the field, even if they do not identify a suspect. Theories that require fewer assumptions tend to feel stronger. A scenario involving environmental vulnerability, combined with either a stranger or a loosely familiar individual, aligns with her expressed unease in the parking lot transition. These explanations depend largely on opportunity and pattern observation rather than emotional motive or chaotic accident. In contrast, the personal motive theory offers no clear trigger, while the accident and cover-up scenario lacks physical proof. Yet the most crucial period, those few minutes in the parking lot, was never documented. That missing interval continues to fuel doubt, leaving investigators and the public suspended between competing explanations and unresolved uncertainty. Theories do more than interpret evidence, they help us manage fear. If the danger came from someone familiar, we search for missed warning signs. If it was random, we attribute it to chance. If it stemmed from environmental failure, we focus on prevention and reform. Yet her disappearance refuses easy explanation. It lingers in the space between probability and proof. The most convincing possibility may also be the quietest, shaped by routine, opportunity, and a brief, unseen moment where everything changed without a sound. Nearly 2 decades have passed, yet Jennifer's disappearance remains suspended between possibility and proof. With limited physical evidence and no definitive resolution, the case exists in the uneasy space between probability and certainty. When facts become scarce, psychology turns into a lens for interpretation. When answers refuse to surface, philosophy follows. Even silence begins to feel substantial, no longer empty, but dense with implication. This reflection does not claim to solve what happened. Instead, it considers what the case reveals about human perception, behavior, and the subtle darkness that can hide behind ordinary appearances. True crime often encourages dramatic narratives, yet reality is usually quieter. What unsettles us most is not spectacle, but ambiguity. Uncertainty forces us to acknowledge how fragile our assumptions about safety and routine truly are. If this was an opportunistic abduction, the perpetrator may have been what criminologists describe as a situational predator. Not necessarily someone with a violent history or visible instability, but someone who recognized vulnerability in a fleeting moment and acted on it. In such cases, opportunity outweighs elaborate planning. The crime grows from circumstance as much as intention. Opportunistic offenders frequently rely on predictable patterns. They observe routines, sometimes casually, sometimes deliberately. They do not require complex schemes, only timing. A familiar parking lot, a consistent departure time, a brief interval without witnesses. These events unfold quickly and often, leave little forensic trace, particularly when executed with speed and confidence. What makes this possibility disturbing is its ordinariness. The individual responsible may not have appeared threatening. He may have blended seamlessly into daily life, a neighbor, a co-worker, a passerby. Violence in this framework is not dramatic. It is sudden, contained, and over within minutes. The predator is ordinary until the instant he is not. If instead the perpetrator was someone Jennifer knew, even distantly, the psychological landscape changes. Familiarity complicates everything. Sustained concealment requires emotional regulation and compartmentalization. Maintaining silence over years suggests either profound fear of exposure or an ability to suppress guilt and anxiety. In that scenario, the wrongdoing extends beyond the initial act. Concealment becomes an ongoing burden. Long-term secrecy demands cognitive control. One must manage stress, avoid confession, and preserve outward normalcy. This level of discipline can indicate manipulative capacity or diminished empathy. Some offenders engage in moral disengagement, subtly reframing events to reduce internal conflict. Harm is minimized, responsibility is diluted. Over time, memory itself may be reshaped. To ease psychological tension, from a philosophical perspective, the case also highlights impermanence. A stable life, a familiar environment, a routine morning. None guarantee safety. Certainty feels solid until it fractures. Human perception often underestimates risk embedded within normalcy. We trust what is familiar, yet it is often within ordinary spaces that vulnerability quietly resides. Western philosophy offers a parallel insight through the study of cognitive bias. Humans normalize familiar environments. We underestimate risks embedded within routine. A well-lit condominium complex appears safe because it conforms to our visual expectations of safety. Repetition breeds comfort. Comfort reduces vigilance. We prepare for dramatic threats, not ordinary ones. Behavioral psychologists note that perceived normalcy often overrides statistical awareness. We worry about rare catastrophes yet overlook mundane vulnerabilities. Parking lots, sidewalks, workplaces. These spaces feel secure precisely because they are unremarkable, yet ordinariness can mask exposure. The everyday setting becomes the last place we expect rupture. From a Christian theological lens, another dimension emerges: the concept of hidden wrongdoing. In Christian doctrine, actions may be concealed from society but not erased from conscience. Guilt can be buried, rationalized, or suppressed, but it does not vanish entirely. The belief that truth ultimately surfaces, whether through confession, consequence, or divine judgment, shapes this worldview. If someone is responsible for Jennifer's disappearance, that individual lives with memory. Whether distorted, minimized, or compartmentalized, memory persists. Conscience may grow quieter over time, but rarely silent forever. The internal cost of secrecy can manifest in subtle ways: restlessness, defensiveness, or the constant management of hidden knowledge. As time diminishes physical evidence, it simultaneously strengthens investigative capability. Technology that was unavailable in 2006 is now far more advanced. Artificial intelligence can enhance video quality, stabilize footage, and evaluate gait patterns with improved accuracy. Even without a clear facial image, posture, stride length, and movement rhythm can help narrow investigative focus. These tools do not guarantee certainty, but they sharpen probability. Revisiting employment and contractor records with integrated modern databases may also uncover missed links, as time and changing circumstances can encourage new disclosures. Forensic science has evolved dramatically. Touch DNA analysis, genealogical database matching, and improved trace recovery have reopened cases long considered unsolvable. Evidence previously deemed too minimal may now produce leads. If preserved material exists, contemporary reanalysis could uncover insights unimaginable during the original investigation. Cold cases are not static. They wait for innovation. Even as investigative tools evolve, one constant remains: silence. In unresolved cases, silence is not empty. It feels dense, layered with unanswered questions and fragments of truth that have never fully surfaced. Somewhere, someone may carry knowledge that has not been shared. That person may not be directly responsible. It could be a witness who noticed something unusual but dismissed it, a co-worker who overheard a troubling remark, or a friend who sensed unease and let it pass. Memory is imperfect, yet it preserves impressions long after physical evidence deteriorates. Darkness rarely announces itself dramatically. More often, it hides within ordinary routines and familiar spaces. Jennifer's life seemed stable. Her morning seemed predictable. Yet within that normalcy, something irreversible took place. If the truth still exists beyond public view, it lives in memory. And memory, though flawed, endures. So the question remains, who holds that truth, and why does silence persist? 20 years have passed, yet the condominium in Orlando still stands as a quiet symbol of uncertainty. Jennifer Kesse is not merely a cold case number archived in a database. She was a daughter deeply loved by her family, a partner building, a future, a young professional with ambitions and plans unfolding. Her disappearance was not just an event, it was an abrupt interruption, a life paused without explanation. This case reminds us how fragile our sense of safety can be. Ordinary places feel secure because they are familiar. Ordinary mornings feel harmless because they are routine. Yet sometimes within those unremarkable moments, something irreversible occurs. A single unseen encounter can reshape the lives of parents, friends, and an entire community forever. If you have reflections or perspectives on this case, share them in the comments. Please like, share, and subscribe to support deeper discussions of unresolved stories that still matter. Some crimes leave no screams, only lingering questions, and sometimes silence echoes louder than truth. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.